everyone, welcome to today's WRF webcast. Today we are talking about WRF Project 5179, Feasibility and Applicability of Leading and Innovative Utility-Led Water Affordability Efforts. My name is Sydney Samples. I'm a research manager at the Water Research Foundation, and I will be moderating today's webcast. We have a fantastic lineup for you of speakers. We're going to start off by hearing from Morgan Shimabuku. She is a senior research specialist at the Research Institute, or at Pacific Institute, my apologies, followed by Greg Pierce. He's a research and co-executive director of the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation. And we also have Sophia Skoda presenting with the director of finance at East Bay Municipal Utility District. Before we get into their fantastic presentations, we do have a few pieces of housekeeping that I'd like to go over. First of all, you can submit your questions through the question box at any time. We will do a Q&A with all three of our speakers at the end of the presentation. If we don't get to your question, don't worry, we'll follow up with you afterwards. Slides and a recording of the webcast will be available on WRF's website. You can also find this on our project page. You can download all of the slides right now, as well as access this project page under event resources on the bottom left of your screen. I highly encourage you to check out the project page because this does have a published report. A certificate of completion will automatically be generated after the webcast. And any questions you have can go to Michelle Suazo. Her email is listed here. And please, at the very end of this, stay with us. We will have a quick survey we'll have you fill out just so that we can make sure we're providing really high quality webcasts and getting ideas on topics you'd like to hear from us. So with that, one last thank you for being here, and I'll pass it over to Morgan.
Thank you so much, Sydney. Hi, everyone. Morgan Shimabuku here, and I'm just going to show this very high-level agenda for our presentation today. Didn't get into details here, really, but that's because our presentation has a lot of good detail. And then just wanted to highlight this image of our front of our report where, of course, we hope you'll be interested to go and dig deeper and get even more details. There's no way we could possibly share it all in this presentation today. So here we go. So I wanted very first to just acknowledge and thank the project team. This was a major effort between all of us, and without the collaboration between UCLA Luskin Center, CIS, UNC Environmental Finance Center, and Pacific Institute, we couldn't have accomplished this project. So just wanted to highlight that. And so now diving a little bit into what really instigated this project or brought around the need for it. As many of you likely recognize, there have been increasing challenges for water and wastewater affordability for customers for a long time. The graph that is shown here by Janice Beecher is of trends in the consumer price indices of different public utilities. And what you'll notice right away is that the water and sewer, the blue line there, is for the past decade and a half or even a little longer, has been at the top, as well as has a very high rate of increase. And the reasons for this are multifaceted and different in every community. This is, an average over the whole country, but some of the main causes for this increasing costs for utilities are listed there in the bullet points to the right. And you might have one or many or even additional things occurring in your own geography. To respond to this, utilities, both water and wastewater utilities, have been doing a lot. They recognize that in many places, utilities have begun to recognize that assistance or affordability efforts can help increase customer satisfaction, but also their ability to recover the costs that they need. And it's, of course, in many cases, people believe it's the right thing to do. So This is just a list again from literature of all of the sort of a summary of the types of efforts that utilities are already undertaking and basically form the basis for what we used for our research for this project. Whether it's revisiting rate setting processes to directly helping reduce leaks and improve efficiency in low-income households, etc. There's a lot that has been done and has been sort of highlighted in case studies. And so that was where we started with this project. I wanted to define some terms. Oh, did I go to the next slide? Is that good? Yeah. Does it say project defining terms there for everyone? Sydney? Yes. Okay. Sorry, just wanted to make sure I was doing that right. So we use in the report the term affordability programs and practices, and there we broadly define them to include both formal and informal interventions and efforts that help lower the burden of utility water and wastewater bills, arrears, or related expenses for eligible utility customers. And so a program we specifically talk about when we're describing an activity with clearly defined objectives, eligibility requirements, and interventions like those listed below there. Or a practice, we're referring to a way or a form that an activity is carried out. So that's more of, for example, a utility deciding that when a customer calls with challenges paying their bill, they're going to refer them to a outside community nonprofit or organization that has a wraparound services to help people who struggle to make ends meet or with other similar services. So that's an example of a practice. The next here around lingering challenges. So in spite of all of the work that has been done, there are lingering challenges for water and wastewater utilities in really trying to understand how to do better, how to design more impactful and helpful affordability programs, what practices make sense, what are the feasibility around these. There's, of course, the barriers in different geographies and different communities. These can range, but there are certain categories that we find commonly around the regulatory restrictions, challenges to fund these efforts, and lack of political will, whether that be lack of support internally at a utility or externally, or even both. There are also continue to be capacity constraints, especially smaller utilities, but really all sizes, to add on these new programs, efforts, services, and really understand how to do it effectively and efficiently and well. So for this project, our overarching goal, and I am going to read this here because I think it's important to be clear, is to help utilities nationwide improve engagement, reach, and impact of their affordability programs and practices. And we really focused on doing that through these three objectives around documentation of what is happening out there in the field, especially the more leading and innovative approaches. We did to some degree try to evaluate associated costs, benefits, and feasibility. However, as we found in a research gap we named, is that there still isn't a lot of publicly available data to do wholesale widespread comparisons. And so that's one thing where there's going to be need to be more work. And then, of course, disseminating those findings as we're doing today and through the report. Another thing we did with this project is really narrow in on to 4 focus areas, because affordability programs and practices is a very, very broad set of things to evaluate. So we felt both as a project team, it would be helpful. We thought it would be really helpful as a project team to narrow in and try to be more specific. And we got feedback directly from the the groups, the utilities and NGOs that were part of our expert panel for this project, as well as from our own research experience as a project team on what these should be. So we focus specifically here on gaining support from key local constituencies, whether that's a utility staff, decision makers inside or outside the utility, and the community itself for impactful affordability programs. Engaging and communicating about affordability. What methods are actually working to reach the customers who need to access these programs the most? And implementing efficiency and conservation for affordability. That there's evidence that customers broadly are able, if they're able to, make to save water, be more efficient in their water use or conserve water. At times, this can help reduce, of course, lead to reductions on their water and sometimes their wastewater bills as well. There's also there's a growing body of evidence around the broader system-wide benefits that can allow utilities to maintain lower rates over the long term when conservation and efficiency are holistically incorporated into the long-term planning and efforts of the utility. So that is discussed in the literature review of this report, but definitely the programs around efficiency and conservation for affordability are also discussed. And then finally, measuring outcomes for affordability programs and practices. There's a lot of actual work on what metrics, especially for evaluating if a water bill is affordable or not, but the practice, actually what utilities are doing in their locations to evaluate their programs and practices hasn't been well studied. And so we tried to bring that out to some degree and evaluate that. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Greg and he'll continue.
Thanks, Morgan. So I'm going to, just discussion and continue with a little bit of a distinction we made in the report between what we're calling leading and innovative affordability programs and practices. And I guess, the implied other category would be sort of standard programs and practices, given the space is somewhat mature. Of course, we recognize that there's not a scientific distinction between leading and innovative programs and practices, but to give you a sense of what we mean, leading programs and practices we defined as those that have already sort of been demonstrated to be particularly effective and efficient for achieving, large-scale affordability impacts. An example of that, we have many examples in the report, but one example would be from Westminster teaming up with Mile High Youth Corp to provide high-efficiency water devices, both in sort of the leading practices. Here would be both the direct install component, as well as really being able to get into multifamily dwellings of income-qualified customers. And then we also looked at innovative, they're sort of, you call them cutting edge programs and practices, ones that are quite novel and show a lot of promise in addressing affordability, but are usually one-offs or pilots or haven't yet been widely tested or accepted. An example of that would be from East Bay Municipal Utilities District, which you'll hear from in just a second, and their particular targeting or outreach of their customer assistance program to homeless shelters, for instance. So those are just some distinctions and again some examples of the leading and innovative programs that we particularly focused this report on and this work. Our broader approach, if you're familiar with WRF-funded projects, you won't be too surprised to hear that we had a project advisory committee, but we also had an expert panel, and you can see the participants of the expert panel on the right-hand side of this slide. Here, a lot of folks from different utilities across the country, as well as non-governmental organizations or nonprofit organizations. Again, we have 4 sort of research areas, and to do the research, we first conducted what we call a landscape review, more or less a literature, but sort of an applied, more practical literature review on what's known about what's being done on that topic area, what the evidence already says, and what the evidence doesn't say on that topic. But then really the bulk of the work, or the heart of the work, was conducted through 4 different workshops, again, one on each focus area, over the last 2 years. And in those workshops, we had expert panel folks, but we also invited and were able to compensate a few community-based organizations and nonprofits that were specifically focused or doing leading and innovative work in the space to each of the workshops, in addition to the expert panels folks that we had join. And then, of course, we took notes, and we actually had transcripts of the workshops, and we both produced blogs on each of the workshops that have been online for quite some time now. Then, of course, did a sort of more robust and thorough analysis of the results and everything that folks shared, as well as follow-up work on examples they gave us of leading and innovative practices that are all reflected in the report. In terms of key results, I'm going to lead us into those, but then transition to some of our other speakers. I'll start with key results on leading practices for what we're calling gaining support for affordability programs. Here we were really focused on sort of the buy-in that was needed from different key constituencies, including and primarily around sort of local decision makers, around utility staff, around utility ratepayers, as well as community groups and voices that are seemingly always integral to implementation of affordability programs and practices. But we really, found in this work that partnering with these constituencies explicitly and directly to include them both in design and implementation was key, as well as being transparent around sort of the financial impacts and evaluation of programs. And one, key example among several that we particularly looked at was around the 2022 passage by the Chicago City Council of a number of different actual measures related to affordability, but including around prohibiting shutoffs for non-payment and implementing cutting-edge transparency reporting requirements for the achievement of water affordability measures. And then more broadly, we found, some of the leading practices in this space were either the offering, because affordability is complex and actually it doesn't have a single definition, either the offering of multiple programs or programs that had sort of multiple different spokes or interventions within them to holistically address the different facets of affordability. And then particularly around designing programs and practices that are tailored to the community or sort of customer base's need, including performing kind of a detailed assessment to customize design and implementation of programs rather than the cookie cutter approach, given that there's so many different approaches out there now that folks have also implemented. And then also to recognize some of the limitations around what water utilities necessarily can offer, and some of the parallel programs, as well as like potential for synergies, which we'll talk a lot about, with other types of utilities or other types of service providers to provide and help customers achieve sort of wraparound affordability support. So again, one example of this is from the San Antonio water system around its sort of uplift program, which in turn has a lot of different components, which you can see here on the screen. I'm not going to read them all out here, but to provide different types of affordability support and assistance to customers depending on their needs. With that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Sophia from East Bay Mud to lead us into a further sort of examination discussion around everything that East Bay Mud is doing in this space. So, Sophia.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So I'm Sophia Skoda. I'm the finance director at the East Bay Municipal Utility District. We serve the eastern San Francisco Bay Area, and we have 1.4 million retail customers, which makes us the second largest retailer in the state of California. And we provide a lot of the affordable housing, if you will, our community does in our area of the Bay, because there's a lot of kind of high sort of housing cost areas, and we're one of the areas where the housing's a little more affordable. And so thinking about affordability and ways that our customers can be supported in paying bills has been kind of a cornerstone for us. We believe we have one of the oldest customer assistance programs in the state of California. And so this is a quote from our customer services director. And I'll read most of it, but at East Bay Mud, we believe in a holistic approach to ensure water affordability. So that's really the cornerstone. So we're not just looking at kind of a single prong approach. We're really looking at a multiple prong approach. And so these 5 core areas that we describe here: financial assistance, water use management, mentioned by Morgan earlier, outreach, community partnerships, and program equity. So those are kind of the cornerstones. We did hire a full-time position to kind of manage all this about 2 years ago. And so we're, looking to deliver affordability to our customers through, this multi-pronged approach. So we're offering them alternatives on conservation. We offer financial assistance on bills, again, linked to the amount of water per person and the number of people in the household, of course. We offer both on the water and the wastewater side. We're also a wastewater services partner in our community. We don't provide the collection, but we do provide the treatment. And we've been able to leverage some of our relationships as well to kind of promote affordability. So for example, we provide on our billing for the collection system agencies of several of our satellites. So City of Berkeley and City of Oakland as examples. And what we've negotiated kind of in our contracts as those have opened up is, hey, we require as a condition of this contract that you offer the same affordability program for your collection system, for example, as we offer on our side to the treatment portion of the bill. So again, we're really focused, particularly in the last couple of years, on building outreach and partnerships with local organizations. In some work that we did, and when I move to the next slide, that was part of that work. We were seeking to understand why we felt like we had a lot more customers that could take advantage of our programs that weren't taking advantage of our programs, and how would we reach those folks. And so what we found was that there was trust a lot of times that was greater in these kind of organizations that were known locally. And so we said, well, we've got to partner with them to be able to look at that. And many of those are social services organizations. And so they're assisting folks with access to food, energy, health and wellness, and even job resources, because, if you have a job, then you're going to be more likely to afford our water and wastewater services. So this next slide that I'm going to get into, it shows a diagram of our service area. And so San Francisco is off on, from where I'm sitting, the left side of the slide. You can see San Francisco Bay there, and you see Treasure Island, and the bridge that goes across there is called the Bay Bridge in our area. And these various shades of kind of pink and red are essentially income levels. And this is data that's available federally. And it enabled us to, identify the disadvantaged communities within our service area from the, American Community Survey data that exists out there. So this is an example of, partnering with our GIS group internally to say, hey, look, can we pull this data and then overlay that with our service area to understand where folks are. And so the lowest incomes are the lightest sort of pink in here. And so what it enabled us to do was to, for example, identify that, oh, look, there's a pocket right around, in our case, it's a large university, UC Berkeley. And UC Berkeley is a campus that attracts a lot of first generation college students who are coming from low-income backgrounds themselves and are struggling to afford housing. There have been articles and so on about students living in their cars or, other kind of creative alternatives for housing. So again, those who have income issues are going to struggle with paying the bills in the shared housing that they might live in, for example. So thinking about, okay, maybe our target outreach materials are going to be different there than they will be in the corridor along the 80, where we're having a lot of high-rise apartment buildings, some housing that's owned by different public entities, for example, like the Oakland Housing Authority. And then you'll see kind of a pink area off to the right, and that tends to be the wealthiest part of our service district, but just sort of where you see the kind of curve that goes down or dog legs down in our service district, that pink area represented a fixed income senior housing development. And so understanding that, maybe we need to think about the groups that we partner with or programs that will work for that subset of our population aren't going to be the same. So again, this slide is really about digging into the data in your particular community, understanding who it is that's struggling, so that you can better think about what are the programs that are going to be able to target and reach those folks in ways that work for them. So that's sort of what we've been doing at East Bay Mud. There's a lot more that's in the report. Of course, I'd direct you to it. And of course, our team is always happy to connect if anyone has further questions. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to Morgan.
Great. Thank you so much, Sophia. Really great to hear from someone who's working, on the ground and with these programs, and your support over the project has been phenomenal. So thank you. I'm going to continue with more key results, and so here we go. I wanted to highlight one really innovative program that we talk about in the report from Long Beach Utilities, based down in Southern California. This program they've been offering for several years now. But they do still consider it a pilot, and it's free turf replacement for income qualified customers. And actually, this really highlights something that Sophia just talked about. They did a lot of analysis to understand, their customer base, and found that there were households owned by people who they served who were low or fixed income, and still maintained large turf landscapes. And so they designed this specifically to help those folks who were struggling to pay their bills, but still had these landscapes. And so, the question really here is how much water did they save? And then how did that translate to bill savings? And I haven't seen that analysis yet, but that's the kind of thing we'd love to learn more about. To go to the next, another just two examples of leading and innovative programs. One we point to in the report that is leading is City of Madison's Customer Assistance Program. They call it their MADCAP. And that is a program that uses tiered discounts for income qualified customers. And so the leading aspect of this is that they are giving different amount of discount for different income levels, with higher discount for lower income. And of course, the details matter, and where you set those tiers are all going to be based on the customers you're working or who you serve. But that sort of tiered approach has definitely been adopted in many places and is a leading approach. The San Antonio water system, I wanted to highlight an innovative program. Although they aren't the only ones thinking along these lines, they're one of the first for sure, is around sewer line replacement and repair for income qualified folks. So they have this Laterals to the People program that if you're qualified, you can have completely free sewer line replacement or repair. And as an affordability sort of effort, this could really help a household that might help with sewer backups. It may reduce contamination that's getting in and around the home. So real quality of life benefit possible there. Again, I don't have data to show that's yet what is happening, but that's the kind of ideas, thinking outside the box and helping these households that otherwise wouldn't be able to fix that. And then also you could think about, are there community level benefits of helping these folks who might otherwise not be able to fix their sewer lines? So greater benefits could be realized across the in the neighborhoods and across the communities from that. We did over the course of this project just really felt like there was a lot of utilities that discuss the foundational or the really big, strong benefits of partnering with organizations in their community. And so it really stuck out to us as a leading practice. So partnerships can take many forms. We've listed the roles there on the left, and they can do all of these things or one of these things, and there's probably other roles that partners can take on. But a key finding was that utilities are partnering to deliver their affordability programs, and they feel that this is a huge benefit to themselves as well as their customers. And one example that we highlight in the report is from Southeast Michigan with United Way, which is an organization found all over the country. And we found, sorry, just checking on something, but we see that here in southeastern Michigan, United Way is partner to water and sewer utilities to offer assistance through them. So that's just one example of a way you can partner. We talked a lot about communication and outreach approaches. I think a lot of utilities seem to have questions around what's going to be effective. How do I actually get in touch with the folks who are going to be eligible for the programs we're offering? And so I'm just highlighting a few that we go over in the report, but there's definitely a lot more. Hosting an affordability program website. So that's really just the utility having their own website that describes the range of programs and practices and other opportunities. They can link to other partners or organizations in the community that have services, and that website can really be something they direct people to and or use. Of course, whether or not your customers are going to your website is a different question. And so if you choose to have this website, we might want to think about how to make sure people are getting there and know it's available as a resource. Mailers and bill stuffers, by and large, we found utilities that use these still feel like they're one of the best ways to talk about or to get information to eligible customers about affordability, recognizing that not everyone who needs the support is necessarily a direct customer. So that can be one of the trade-offs here, is it doesn't reach everybody. And there is mixed evidence on how much it directly leads to an affordability benefit, but there is evidence that it increases program inquiries. And it, can be different for different groups. And also here you'll notice we put in considerations. So one thing we tried to point out is, what are the things to think about when you're using these approaches to ensure that it's going to be understood and well communicated to the people who, again, need these services. Hanging door hangers is another approach utilities take. And one advantage of this is you can reach more renters potentially if that don't receive the bill directly. You also could, but there could be challenges. For example, if you have a lot of people living in apartment buildings that you don't have access to, this might not be a feasible approach. Text messaging, that's something we got a lot of interest in, and some utilities are doing it, some aren't. And what it seems like is that, there are certain demographics that may find text messaging as the quickest way and most convenient way to get in touch, generally in the younger age groups. And most people in the US now do have cell phones, but there's also a lot of barriers, trade-offs listed there, like It may require that customers opt in and customers change their phone number often and things such as this. So the report discusses a lot of other approaches just listed at the very bottom there if you have an interest. So another thing we talked about a lot in our workshops was enrollment and how streamlining and work that can streamline enrollment processes can really help improve the reach of and impact of affordability programs, because it's hopefully getting more people who are eligible into the program. And just a leading practice on the left there around collaboration. So back to partnerships, that can really help. We found that utilities have really benefited from working with partners to verify and auto-enroll their customers. And then on self-certification, that's more of an innovative practice in the water and wastewater utility space. And there are some water utilities that are trying this, but it's not super common. But they noted the utilities that are trying this say it is particularly effective for rapid enrollment. And it did help increase their enrollment to allow self-certification. And of course, they reserve the right to audit those self-certified enrollees, but they felt like it was a useful, at least, thing to pilot. It doesn't necessarily have to be something you stay with if it doesn't seem right in your community, but it is something that some utilities are trying. Another sort of example of streamlining enrollment from from Westminster, Colorado, again, who was on our expert panel. You know, they worked, and I like this example because it could be applicable in many other locations across the country. They really found that working with the state agency in charge of LIHEAP was a really useful partner for sharing data and auto-enrolling their customers into a water assistance program, recognizing that LIHEAP as a federal program at this point has some uncertainty in its future, but just wanting to note that there are some there are programs out there already happening in every state that may be an obvious sort of opportunity to partner and then improve the reach and enrollment in your own programs. Another thing that Westminster really pointed out was the great benefit to them in reducing the administrative effort by working with the Colorado State Agency that administers LIHEAP. And so here, this is the last results slide I have before jumping to our conclusions and our research gaps. We saw that there are leading and innovative practices for measuring programs and evaluating water affordability. And there's been a lot of research in this space. And I think I said this at the beginning, but there's still a lot of questions around what actually are utilities doing in practice to measure and evaluate the effectiveness of their affordability programs. So we use these two categories. These aren't the the only ones or the ways that anyone has to think about these metrics, but for us, this is how we organized metrics around implementation-based metrics and outcome-based metrics. Implementation-based metrics are really tracking the affordability intervention performance, whereas the outcome-based metrics are using to assess sort of the broad financial burden of utility bills on customers. One thing I will note here is that it's well recognized, at least among the utilities we were speaking with and in the literature, that average annual bill relative to the median household income is not a very useful metric for really evaluating affordability because it misses it often misses many of the folks who are actually struggling to pay their bills. And so that was one recognition. We kept it up there though, because many utilities are still using it. So that in practice, it's still used, and I think it's simple. And that's one of the reasons it's something they can actually calculate. So Just noting that it's not any longer considered best practice, but it is still in use. And the other thing is that one of the benefits of setting these metrics, of course, is then you as the utility can really track and understand if your programs are effective, if they're meeting the goals that you've set for the program. And as a short case study, we also see a major benefit in utilities where they are actually reporting those metrics out to the broader public and to their communities. By and large, as far as we know, most of these reporting examples are based because they're mandatory. So in the case of Philadelphia, for example, the city council requires that they provide an annual report on their tiered assistance program to the city council. And so that annual report, is mandated, but the information they put in there has been used by the utility to make major changes to the practices around how they enroll people, to the actual levels of assistance they provide, and all kinds of things. If you haven't ever taken a look at Philadelphia's annual reports on their TAP program, I highly recommend it because it gives a lot of good information around tracking and evaluating a program, although it is mostly focused on the implementation-based side. I was just going to say it looks at, for example, enrollment numbers, denial rates, the processing times for applications, and things such as this. So we just wanted to raise that up as a good example of very transparent reporting and an opportunity for utilities to really see whether they're on track to meet their own goals. So with that, we'll be done pretty soon and happy to take your questions soon. I wanted to share some of our conclusions. So this is another quote from Heather Sackett at City of Westminster, and she just said that, collaborating with the project team and participating in this research study really opened our eyes to a new level of sophistication in customer assistance programs, and just pointed out that there are many new novel programs and data analysis approaches that they hadn't thought of. And so really, hopefully you'll dive into the report and learn more about all of these things. We still conclude and find that gaining the necessary support to, one, have an affordability program or new program can be very difficult, both from the internal side, getting support from your staff, your colleagues, or from the decision makers at the utility or city or organization that you work at, but then also getting the support from public. So those things are real, and that continues to be a challenge. There's no, another finding was that there really isn't a silver bullet when it comes to affordability program design. And as we've emphasized before through this presentation, there really is a huge number and variety of how to do these things. And there seems to be the leading utilities in this space often have a very wide range of offerings, so that they're really trying their best to customize it to their specific community. And partnerships, I'll just say that again, that is a leading practice. If you're struggling as a utility just to do it all on your own, and you haven't taken the step to start working with organizations in your community on this challenge, then we highly encourage that, just based off of our experience in talking to these utilities around that being so helpful. Communication and outreach is really growing in sophistication. Utilities are getting really savvy with getting the word out, and we list tons of different examples in the report, some really creative things, and so encourage everyone to go take a look at those. And then evaluation of these programs is, like I was just talking about, it still requires some innovation. There's still a lot of challenge with knowing how to collect the data that they need to really evaluate the programs, but even before that, goal setting and which metrics should be used and are most useful. So with that, I just have two last slides on the gaps that we identified in our research. Analysis of quantitative measures, just said that on the effectiveness of these programs, and from the perspective of the utility and customer is one remaining gap. Really understanding whether or not these programs and practices are leading to a higher quality of life for the customer. If that's part of the goal, then the truth is that really hasn't been explored to a high degree and could be really interesting and important. Also, the quantitative data on the monetary cost of these programs has not been made very publicly available and could inhibit cost effectiveness analysis or industry benchmarking, which could be useful. Really understanding what helps this sector, the water and wastewater utilities, innovate in this space could be useful. And then also the other side, the barriers and legal restrictions. And here we point out those barriers and legal restrictions specifically to auto enrollment, because there are some stark challenges state by state on what's allowed and what's not allowed, or at least what's perceived as allowed and what's perceived as not allowed, probably even utility to utility. So that needs some more work. And then really how to support small or more capacity and resource limited utilities with having more holistic approaches to affordability, and how utilities across all sizes can really identify eligible customers so they can better target their outreach efforts. And then universally accepted benchmarks for understanding whether or not your affordability efforts are effective or not. So with that, I am finishing mine and just putting up the references slide there. I know it's very small, but you can get hopefully the PDF. And these are all references that are in the report as well. So Sydney, I think I'm passing it back to you to lead the Q&A.
Yes, you are. So thank you, Morgan, Greg, and Sophia. That was great. We're really excited to jump into some questions. So I've got a few prepared, and then got some others on my mind if we run out of audience questions. So Morgan, we'll start with you on this question, and then Greg, feel free to jump in. What are other qualifiers folks are using other than median household income, just for ideas?
Yeah, so other than median household income, 20th percentile income is one of the sort of more commonly used denominators. But as was listed there on the slide, there's also sort of different approaches like hours at minimum wage to pay for a bill. And these are metrics that have been put out in literature by other researchers. But that's just one example. The affordability ratio is another example. I'd say it seems like, though, there honestly is a lot of utilities just don't have all of the data, or yet they haven't been able to get the data to really go deep and explore lots of metrics. So that is a space that, like we said, still needs some innovation and support.
Thanks, Morgan. Greg, anything you want to add on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of actual eligibility at the customer level, additional criteria are around, poverty level, whether it's 100%, 150%, or 200%, the federal poverty level, or using area median income, which is an adjustment basically of income level to regional housing costs coming out of Housing and Urban Development Department, but it's going to be dependent on your region. Or I think a big thing is just cross enrollment. If you're already qualified for SNAP or WIC, you can automatically qualify or enroll in the water utilities program. So those are just some other I think, qualifiers, if that's what the question was getting at.
Yeah, I think so. And for both of you, we'll ask this question as well on, have either of you helped communities develop independent special water districts or work with existing water agencies or authorities?
Yeah, so I can say certainly on the latter, at UCLA, we work commonly with utilities and other agencies and authorities. It's very sort of practical work, including on this project, but other projects. So we work directly with utilities on these topics. I wouldn't say, though, that I have personally helped work with special districts, but haven't helped set them up in the way that I think the question is getting at, except in the context of sometimes, around regionalization or consolidation topics. But I'll pass it over to Morgan.
My response is pretty much the same. Yeah, we worked with a large variety of different governance, water utilities or water agencies that have different governance structures, but not to develop a special district or something like that of that nature. That's not our work.
Okay. This next question, we're going to start with you, Sophia, just to get kind of the utility perspective, and then open it up to Morgan or Greg on if there's anything more general you want to add to it. And so the question is, what are the costs associated with managing these types of programs on the utility side, and who pays the cost of them?
Those are great questions, and they're a particularly big deal in California, where we are subject to what was voted on by voters, Proposition 218, became part of the California state constitution, Articles 13C and D, where we can't subsidize one customer's bill by another customer's rate. So in our particular case, we have elected to use our lease revenue from real estate that we own. And we have a particularly kind of hilly service area. And so we have a lot of sites that are super attractive to cell phone tower companies. And we bring in, about $5.5 million through those lease revenues. So that is the source of revenue for our customer assistance programs. But yes, as the programs have grown, the need to have kind of permanent staff administering those programs have grown. And so I think I mentioned that 2 years ago, we created a full-time position to go ahead and administer the partnerships, review of applications, all of that. And so, for us at this point, an FTE fully loaded is probably close to $250,000. So these are not insubstantial numbers. And in our case, we do need to have non-rate revenues to support those costs.
Thanks, Sophia. That's really interesting. Morgan or Greg, anything to add?
I think that just in a broad sense, every utility has its own sort of approach for how they're going to do that and what's politically feasible, supported by regulation. And I think that there's honestly not a lot of publicly available data on this, so we didn't get into the details of that in our research. But I think it's just going to have to be tailored to what is allowed and also accepted in your particular community. So I don't know if, Greg, you want to get into more specifics, but.
Just to say, we tried looking at costs associated with managing programs within utilities, but there's really, we have had trouble getting, it looks different for every utility. That doesn't mean you couldn't measure it, but it really depends on the scale of the utility and the synergies with existing utility software programs, ways of connecting with customers, but particularly, staffing and whether there's already, outreach and sort of how it fits into customer service programs or units or other entities. So we haven't done a full-on study on that. I'd still be quite interested in that. But there is, can be really substantial cost, or there can be, a lot of synergies in terms of staffing time that it doesn't have to add up to a lot of additional cost, depending on the approach. But the cost of the program, has to be paid. directly through a revenue source, and getting to another question, and it's kind of already been addressed, but in California, Prop 218 really ties the hands of public entities in doing this. Can't use rate revenue, very unequal playing field compared to the investor-owned utilities. So they just have to find non-rate revenue or draw on that, and that can be limited, especially as you start to think about scaling. I do think there's some creative ways that various utilities have undertaken this. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't comment on their legality, but I think it particularly around, maybe a frontier is around making the argument that can be made, has been successfully made on the energy side, around efficiency and conservation measures that actually can save the utility money, that can also be convergent with being approved under Prop 218. But I will say it's an uphill battle, especially with recent rulings on Prop 218. So I recognize the challenge.
Yeah, and I would say on the electric utility side, given that they're managed and overseen by the CPUC, we most of us water purveyors who are in the public sector, we're not governed by the same kind of rules. But yeah, I mean, on the CPUC side, if you're a water entity there, I think that's a fantastic approach.
Morgan, this next question is going to go to you because I want to make sure we get to it. Do you have any suggestions for very small municipalities that have more resource or capacity constraints and may have less diverse of a ratepayer base?
Yeah. I think the two that come to mind is the first one is actually just having that website that even if you aren't putting your own programs on there, you're linking to every resource you can find in your community and state that allows people to get support. And that at the very minimum, of course, and then when people call and say, sorry, I can't pay my bill, or I'm struggling, or whatever your conversations you might have at customer service, making sure your customer service team knows that they can look at that website, direct people there, or just help connect people to other things. And then the other one would be to see if there are, for example, like a United Way type organization in your community that already has some customer service oriented programs they're giving. And is there a very small amount that you could feasibly sort of start there, and they manage the program, they get people enrolled, they can do that. That's, to me, those are two of the ones that came up and sounded like, from what we heard from our folks that we talked to, is more feasible for a smaller utility. Of course, that's not going to be true for everyone though. So I don't know. Yeah, Greg or Sophia, if you have thoughts on what's the sort of simple low-hanging fruit.
Greg, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I'll just say really briefly, as I know we're running out of time. I mean, I don't think there's, beyond what Morgan said, I don't think there's simple low-hanging fruit if you don't have sort of diverse ratepayer base, or you don't have other non-rate revenue you can use. I think it really comes down to, and there are some places doing this, like counties that are taking on this exact issue and trying to provide funding, particularly for municipalities or areas that are less able to finance affordability, support themselves, or states. Or again, LIWAP was really useful when it was operating at the federal level. So advocating around that, being part of coalitions that can do that to get support for your community when you can't provide it yourself necessarily, is probably the way to go.
Just one thing that I would add is, I think getting creative around helping people with making sure that they're really using the water that they need is another sort of low-hanging fruit idea. Are there ways that you can use maybe AMI data to make sure that you're kind of targeting, the portions of your service area that are housing folks that have lower incomes, and are there ways that you can kind of help them really manage their bills more effectively? Can you create partnerships? I mean, there are folks, and this is covered in the report too, like Promise Pay, who are taking on the kinds of things of, hey, sending a text message like, don't forget your bill is due. Are there ways that you can spread out, level billing over time? I mean, I think just getting creative around what you can do inside of your existing envelope, and doing surveys with your actual customers that are in those particular demographics that you're trying to support might be things that you can do to understand what you can do inside of the envelope that you have.
Thank you for that. I think this is a great place to wrap up. I want to thank our three speakers, Morgan, Greg, and Sophia. You guys have been fabulous. This has been a really educational webcast. They've developed a really great report, so I encourage you all to go look at that. There were some really, really great pieces in there that could be helpful for your future. Thank you to the audience for sticking with us through the end. Please stick around for one last survey to let us know how this was and other topics you're interested in. And I do want to say, if this is an area you're interested in, WRF will be launching a new RFP on alternatives to water shutoffs the next month or two. So whether or not you're interested in doing that research or potentially being a participating utility, I definitely encourage you to look at that, because that's kind of our next launching point from this research. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.